The information shared in these conversations and videos are intended for general knowledge and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered as legal advice or professional guidance. Additionally, any documentation or references to specific content are solely for the purpose of discussion and understanding. It does not imply endorsement, promotion, or support of said content. The views expressed in these videos and/or conversation are those of the individuals involved and do not represent any official stance or opinion. The content you are about to experience may contain strong language, including explicit words and phrases. This language is used for artistic expression and may be integral to the storyline or character development. It is important to note that the use of such language does not endorse or promote offensive behavior. Viewer discretion is advised, and please enjoy the show responsibly. Disclaimer. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. The Canadian Copyright Act, Section 29, allows an individual to use copyright-protected materials when creating a new work, such as a mashup, and to post the new work online on a website like YouTube. Fair dealing provision for specific purposes like research, private study, education, parody, satire, criticism, review, and news reporting.
Step up, step up! Yeah! We pledge! We pledge! We pledge! We pledge! Yeah. Step in the arena, mind locked and loaded. Truth on my blade, every line's exploded. You swing your words, I counter with precision. Battle of reason, this is my mission. Raise your fist, let them know. No. Raise your voice, let it blow. Woo! We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. Yeah. No fear, no chain, no treason. Woo. We clash our swords of reason. Woo. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. Yeah. No fear, no chain, no treason. Woo. We clash our swords of reason. Step back, I'm a scholar and a fighter. Every claim you throw, I strike tighter. Logic and power, I never fold. In the war of words, I'm solid gold. Raise your fist, let them know. Whoa. Raise your voice, let it blow. Woo. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. Yeah. No fear, no chain, no treason. Woo. We clash our swords of reason. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. Yeah. No fear, no chain, no treason. Woo. We clash our swords of reason. Every thought a fortress, every claim a storm. We forge a truth where chaos takes form. Ideas ignite like lightning through the night. In the war of minds, we bring the light. Step in, feel the heat. Truth is my weapon, never beat. Raise them high, break the ceiling. With a fire, with a feeling. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. No fear, no chain, no treason. We clash our swords of reason. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. No fear, no chain, no treason. We clash our swords of reason. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. No fear, no chain, no treason. We clash our swords of reason.
Welcome, everybody, to Swords of Reason right here on the SpeakEazy show, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. And this is where logic meets passion. All right. If you're new here, the format is simple, sharp. Each debater gets 10 minutes for their opening statements, then 5 minutes of uninterrupted rebuttals. After that, we enter in the arena for the full hour of back and forth debate. This is where the arguments can clash and the iron can sharpen the iron. All right. And then finally, after each side delivers 5 minutes of closing statements to lock in their cases. And then when that's done, we move into a 30-minute Q&A. I'll drop the live Q&A. Actually, it's already in the chat there for you. But keep in mind the Super Chats, PayPals, and Cash Apps will get priority. And if those fill up the entire 30 minutes, the free chat questions may not get answered. So if there's something you want guaranteed to be asked, make sure you send it through Super Chat. And then once the formal debate is done, we open the doors. Sorry, we open the doors to the Chaos and Chill panel, where the community can hop in, challenge the debaters, or ask follow-ups if the debaters choose to stick around, because that part is optional for them. And this is usually where things, get wild. Today's debate prompt: should we abolish the Electoral College? On the affirmative tonight, we have bass guitar, new to Swords of Reason Arena. stepping in with a fresh perspective and a blade we haven't seen tested yet. He's not super active on YouTube for now, but after going through the fire of tonight, I got a feeling he might start dropping some more content for you all. His channel is in the description, so make sure you guys go show him some support as he sharpens his voice in these debates. All right. And then on the negative side, we have Wicked Wally, also known as the Axeman, a familiar competitor, known for top tier dad jokes, gaming streams, hot topic discussions, and regularly jumping into debate panels all across YouTube. All right. He's been in plenty of arenas before, and tonight he's here to sharpen his blade once again. All right. Debaters, you know the rules, and we're going to start with the affirmative. So, whenever you are ready, bass guitar, I will start the timer up with your voice. And once again, thank you both for being here tonight.
Yeah, okay. First off, I wanted to thank SpeakEazy and Wicked Wally for doing this debate. Hopefully, we'll have a really good discussion. So, I want to start off by saying that the Electoral College doesn't actually do what people tend to claim that it does, and that's either historically or currently. So, if we look at historically, I want to start with by reading a part of Federalist 68, which was written by Hamilton, and he was discussing the goals of the Electoral College. And as I read this, I want everybody in the audience to think back to the past 30 years or as long as you can remember, and regardless of your party, ask if the Electoral College is actually accomplishing the goal that Hamilton said that it was supposed to accomplish. He said, the process of election affords a moral certainty that the office of president will never fall to the lot of any man who is not, in an eminent degree, endowed with the requisite qualifications. It will not be too strong to say that there will be a constant probability of seeing the station filled by characters preeminent for ability and virtue. Does anybody actually think that that's the case? I don't think so. I don't think that it's consistently provided that result. In fact, the Electoral College doesn't even really function as it used to anymore. If we look back to the first ballots when there were general elections in the states, Washington wasn't even on the ballot. People were supposed to vote for non-office holders from their community, and there were actually no presidential candidates. And then those non-office holders would get together and they would vote on who they thought would be president. Currently, there are 37 states plus Washington, D.C., which have faithless elector laws, which means that electors they don't have their own will. They have to vote a certain way, depending on the state. And so due to that, I mean, the historical purpose is just gone. So whatever the historical purpose of the Electoral College was, that just doesn't exist anymore. Now, if we look to the more modern defenses of the Electoral College, those also, if we examine them, they don't hold any water. For example, I suppose Wicked Wally might say that it gives smaller states a voice. But there's actually no evidence that candidates spend any time appealing to Wyoming, North Dakota, New Hampshire, or Vermont. In fact, most of the resources went to 7 states. So in 2024, 94% of all events and 70% of all campaign spending went to 7 states, with the most of those going to the largest of those states and not the smallest of those states. Virtually no time or resources were spent trying to hear the voice of people in New Hampshire, Vermont, Wyoming, or North Dakota. Sometimes people might say, well, it forces candidates to build broad coalitions. But once again, that's not true. They focus on 7 to 12, depending on the year, swing states, not broad coalitions. In those swing states, candidates focus on shifting small percentages and not forming broad coalitions. In fact, if we want to look at broad coalitions, it took Trump 42 states to win the popular vote in 2024. It took Biden the same in 2020, 42 states, okay? Now, by comparison, for the Electoral College, Trump only needed 21 states, and he didn't need a single vote from any other state to win the Electoral College in 2024. Biden only needed votes from 17 states in 2020 to win the Electoral College, versus both of them needing 42 states to win the popular vote. So I think needing votes from 42 states would be a broader coalition than needing votes from 17 or 21. He might say some kind of variation of it keeps California and New York, or Los Angeles, New York City, or Chicago. It keeps those big cities or big states from controlling elections. Well, first off, that isn't true. States and cities aren't homogenous. They don't vote 100% of the way. And in fact, because of the winner-take-all system, it actually allows states to act as if they were homogenous, with just 50% plus one of the vote. And we can dig into the actual numbers on that, hopefully, throughout in the open discussion. So in addition to the Electoral College not doing what people in the past or currently say that it does, it just isn't a good system. And we know this. If we look at every single elected office in the United States, at every level, every single one counts the votes of the constituency equally. So if you look at his mayor, his constituents are the people in the city. All the votes within that city are counted equally. We don't say, no, in the 250 years of America's experience, nobody's ever said, well, wait, shouldn't we count people who live in a cul-de-sac with 6 houses? Should we count their vote more than people who live on a street with 100 houses, right? We have to protect the people that live in cul-de-sacs. Never has anybody ever suggested that in 250 years. Because it would be absurd. If somebody suggested that, they would say, okay, that's kind of ridiculous. Everybody's votes should count equally. And the constituency of the presidency is the people of the United States. And so the constituents should have their votes count equally for the president of the United States. But if we're in the idea of weighting votes to protect minorities, doing it on a state basis is kind of dumb, and it's kind of weird. Right? Why don't we look at things like, say, well, hey, maybe racial minorities should get an outweighted vote, right, to protect their rights, or maybe people who have a minority of the wealth, maybe their votes should count more, right? Well, no, nobody would ever suggest those types of things, but for some reason, when it comes to, well, some people who live in some states, their votes should count more than other votes. For some reason, that makes sense to people. I don't know. That just doesn't. That seems a really weird way to decide whose votes we're going to count more than others. In addition to counting votes unequally, the Electoral College is actively dividing us. It creates a simple us versus them mentality. People view red states and blue states. Think about in the audience, everybody talks about, oh, this is a red state or this is a blue state. Everybody does that, and we only do that because of the Electoral College. And it sounds funny, but it's true. Nobody says a state is red or blue based on their state legislatures or governors, a majority of their cities, or their congressional delegation. No, because these all have wildly different results for which states would be red and which states would be blue. Everybody looks at red state and a blue state based off of the Electoral College. And fun fact, the convention of using red states and blue started in 2000. Prior to that, different news networks used different colors for the parties. Some networks would use red for the Democrats and blue for the Republicans. Some even used yellow and green. You can go back and look in the 80s for election nights, and the electoral map looks all different. But in 2000, everybody started using red for Republican, blue for Democrat. And because of this simple, like you look at a map and you see 2 colors, it creates this us versus them mentality. And it creates this, and that also is exacerbated by the simplifying effect of the 50% plus 1, which this 50% plus 1 winner-take-all system, that it helps foster that red versus blue mentality. But that's just not reflective of reality. In fact, California has more Republican voters than any other state in the union, but people think of that as a blue state. The states with the second and third most Democrat voters in the country, Texas and Florida. But nobody would say that those are blue states. So you might say, well, if the Electoral College doesn't do what it's supposed to do, and it's unjust and it divides us, why has nobody thought to change it in the 250 years? Is this a crazy, radical new idea? No, removing the Electoral College in favor of a national popular vote is not a new idea. Many of the founders at the convention actually argued for this. This includes James Madison, George Mason, John Dickinson, Governor Morrison, James Wilson. The last 2 wrote the preamble to the Constitution. And arguments presented against it at the time just don't apply today, like saying, oh, it'd be too difficult to campaign in the 13 states. Oh my gosh, they're so big and far apart. Nobody could possibly campaign in 13 states. In fact, efforts to reform or abolish the Electoral College started almost immediately. Hamilton advocated for changing it in the 1820s, and in the past 250 years, there have been more than 700 attempts to reform or remove the Electoral College. So throughout U.S. history, we've updated our institutions in favor of giving more power to we the people. This is a good thing. Whether it's allowing black men to vote, women to vote, or directly electing senators, this is the trend of the institutions of the United States. Half the states didn't even have general elections for the president for the first several U.S. Presidential elections, and that counts South Carolina, which didn't hold any general elections until after the Civil War. Nobody, not even my opponent, will argue for that, returning to that system. And as Jefferson said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and so our votes should be equal. The trend of expanding power to we the people and fulfilling Jefferson's promise should continue with we the people of the United States electing directly and equally the President of the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you for that opening statement, bass guitar. And with that, we're going to hand the mic over to Wicked Wally for your opening statement. So, Wicked Wally, whenever you're ready, I will start the timer up with your voice.
Okay, so bass guitar took this basically where I was expecting him to take it 2 weeks ago when I started preparing for how this was going to go with me being in the negative. And we heard a lot about my popular vote, my equality, stuff I have heard before. And to start out, I'm just going to boil this down to as simple and basic of a logical explanation as I possibly can. A reason that we fought a war for independence is because we did not want to be ruled by a dictator from across the ocean without representation. The logic behind the Electoral College is that, say, hypothetically, Maine, the people of Maine should not have to be ruled by the people in Boston just because Boston has a larger population and can outvote their population. The point of the Electoral College was actually to make presidential candidates campaign in more places. If, hypothetically, in the early days of our country, the most populous areas in the country consisted of Boston, Philadelphia, Richmond, Virginia, and maybe some small surrounding areas thereof, yes, you could literally have campaigned in those three cities and probably won a presidential election in those early days. That was the logic of the Electoral College, was to actually encourage candidates to do the opposite. And the Electoral College is basically the way it functions. It's a suggestion to presidential candidates that they ought go everywhere. They ought campaign in every state and be coming out with policies that are sensitive to the needs of Midwestern states, Northwestern states, agriculture-heavy states, industry-heavy states. They should be going everywhere and getting a comprehensive understanding of policies that work in different areas of the country. A voting population in Miami does not give a flying fuck about what farmers need. They don't care about what about what might or might not be good from Wyoming versus for economic policies or conservationist policies. They don't live there. They don't have to care. It makes much more sense that there's a system where every state is weighted somewhat for the purposes of that and if we don't have a direct democracy, then who cares? We can have any kind of system in there that we want. I don't believe just a flat popular vote in America would not be practical because it ultimately would just make it easier for one side to tilt the election in their favor. Now, going back to early in his opening, going over what states have been campaigned in just the last few elections, Yeah, it's been well known since 2016. Trump focused on key battleground states because because their electoral value, which a lot of it was some Midwestern states and areas like Pennsylvania, that had the ability with their electoral votes to tip the election in his favor. And he went into those battleground states with messages that were important to farmers, important to manufacturers, important to factory workers, important to the business owners. And that's how he won those states. Now, that would be demonstrating, yeah, him using the electoral college system the exact way it was intended. Now, he does bring up a fair point. Yeah, the electoral college does not function as it was originally intended to today. There over half states, it's a default, the electoral vote just follows the popular vote in that state automatically, and the electors don't have the freedom to vote their conscience when it comes down to who is president. And of course, because they have the majority, yeah, the states that don't have that that don't make the popular vote married to the electoral vote, they just follow suit, because at that point, what else is there to do for them? Now, this has somehow led, now the realities, which we can reform, have somehow led him to want to take this into an accelerationist mentality instead of how fast can we make this extinct and rip it apart and just get down to one person, one vote democracy in America, which with how many issues we already have with voter fraud and political division, we're only making things much worse. And I'm also going to point out that I'm very interested in another aspect of his opening statement, where apparently political division in the past 25 years is the fault of the Electoral College. The media making people more politically divided in the past 25 years is somehow the fault of the Electoral College. And even if you're going to go into the whole issue with Florida and when it was Bush versus Gore in 2000, fair enough. I can see why someone would make that argument, but really, I think the increased political division that we saw in 2000 would actually be more indicative of when we abolished the fairness doctrine, and come the 2000 election, people in the media could be as loud and proud of their preferences for candidates and their preferences on the issues and the parties. They didn't have to cover things in a balanced and non-divisive manner to inform the public like they used to when there were elections going on. Because when you're saying that, yeah, elections didn't really, the news and everything around elections weren't as divisive in the late 80s and early 90s, that is absolutely correct. We also had the fairness doctrine in the late 80s and early 90s. So the Electoral College, to me, really has nothing to do with the division in that respect. You could just as easily take it in the direction of the media being massively unregulated around the same time, from a perspective of news coverage. Now, I think it would be better for us to not only preserve the Electoral College system, because when you look at it, yeah, everybody's vote does matter still matters under the electoral system, because it's telling rural states where there may be more small businesses than big, or more farmers than there's industry, that their vote matters too, and actually weighting it makes sure that those people in less populated areas who have their own needs that support the rest of this country still get heard and still have a valuable input when it comes to that election. Now, as far as how we could improve it, I think there are definitely ways to do that. If we were to go back to just straight up going, yep, the electors can now all vote their conscience, well, That might get more dicey today, but it would be better than getting the system back to the way it originally was intended to function would be better than a neutered system, because right now we have it in such a state that people can just go, well, do we save it or do we kill it? I really don't know. And people go, well, it would just be easier to kill off the system than it would be to fix it. I disagree. And with that, I'll yield the last minute.
All righty. Thank you for that opening, Wicked Wally. With this, we're going to get into the 5-minute uninterrupted rebuttals. So we're going to hand the mic back to bass guitar. And whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer up with your voice.
Yeah. So Wicked Wally said, let's see, he said that it forces candidates to campaign in more states, but that, once again, we looked at that, and that isn't true. It doesn't really force candidates to campaign in more states, or even in more diverse states, even more rural states. The two states that have the most farmers in the country are California and Texas, and nobody really campaigns there because those are locks. They're not battleground states. So nobody really cares. Why are those farmers not deserving of attention as someone in like Ohio? I don't know why that would be why a farmer in California doesn't deserve to have to be appealed to, but a farmer in Ohio or a farmer in Pennsylvania does. Also, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that I don't think the Electoral College created political division, but I'm saying it exacerbates it by creating an easy us versus them mentality. Because everybody, when we talk about political division in this country, everybody talks about red states, blue states. Oh, they're just from a blue state. Oh, don't blow up my red state, right? And I'm saying that simplistic way of saying red state, blue state, that is directly attributable to the Electoral College. That's exactly what people are talking about. People aren't, when they say like, oh, this is just a loser, blue state or a dumb red state, they're not saying, that doesn't have anything to do with like the fairness doctrine. I'm saying that aspect of it is directly attributable to the Electoral College, just because it creates, the current president, he threw up the electoral map he had it behind the Resolute desk for like the first 3 months of his thing, because it does that. You see, red, blue, it creates that simple thing. So I wasn't necessarily saying that all the political division is attributable to in this country is attributable to the Electoral College. I'm just saying that I think it exacerbates it, and I think it worsens the issues that may have already been present, and other factors, probably other factors that go into it. I absolutely would agree with that. The fairness doctrine being one of those. That being said, I kind of would just I want to get more into the back and forth. So I don't know if you can take the extra 2.5 minutes and just add it to the back and forth, or what.
Yeah, no, that's a problem. If you want to yield the rest of your time there, no problem. Thank you for that rebuttal. And we'll hand the mic over to Wicked Wally. Whenever you're ready for your uninterrupted rebuttal, I will start the timer up with your voice.
Okay, so my issue there is still, as far as the Electoral College somehow exacerbating political division. Well, the Electoral College apparently had over 200 years to exacerbate political division before the year 2000, and it really didn't seem to be doing it. Nobody was saying there's increased political division because of this damn Electoral College. So I would say because here's the thing, when you under the electoral system, I actually think it's in some ways less of an us versus them, because like I live in New Hampshire. New Hampshire, when it comes to state elections and local elections, tends to lean pretty to the right. For whatever reason, when it comes to presidential elections, we tend to go blue when it comes but then so does most of New England, for that matter. Some of Maine doesn't, but Maine lives under an odd rule where they divide their 4 electoral votes, so you can actually win all 2 or none, or maybe 1. Now, under a popular vote system, I think you would actually exacerbate that political disharmony, because now in every state, everybody around everyone, they're going to be looking at, okay, well, you either have to vote, or you have to like not, or I have to try to persuade you to vote for my guy, because now every single person in every single state could be the difference maker in this election. And suddenly we're putting even more of an emphasis on the fact that everyone around you is either politically your friend or politically your enemy, or someone you can make a political deal with. And when you're going to take the election down to a matter of just bodies voting, which is how parliament systems are run, yeah, you're actually encouraging parties to engage in more corruption and engage in more fraud, because they just have to throw a higher number at everyone than the opposition does, and they can win. I would actually say, and as far as issues in states like California, well, guess what guides California's electoral votes? Basically, LA. A lot of the liberal strongholds in California end up swaying the state to blue under the Electoral College, same way as New York City basically negates all of the conservative votes in New York under the federal electoral system. So this is where we come, when it comes down to reform, if anything, the fact that an entire liberal stronghold or a conservative stronghold can sway a state federally that may, the entirety of that state may lean in the opposite direction, actually makes a very good case to me as to why we should not only save and reform the Electoral College system, but I think we should actually expand it into every state having an electoral system that determines their electoral votes. Because then New York City would no longer dominate New York. LA would no longer be negating these Republican voters he's concerned about in California. If we start determining the electoral votes and dividing states by district and county, then now everybody's vote matters in every state, and we don't need a popular vote to do that. And with that, I'll yield my minute.
All right. Thank you for that rebuttal. Great rebuttal from both sides. Before we move into the hour of back and forth, I just want to talk to the audience real quick. If you're watching right now, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and subscribe to both of tonight's debaters. Okay, their links are in the description. All right, we host all kind of debates here on Swords of Reason. It's politics, culture, ethics, internet topics, video games. All right, okay? We debate everything. Right, anything where reasoning and passion will collide. So if you enjoy this format, make sure you're locked in, because we got a lot more coming. Also, reminder for you in the chat, after the closing statements happen, we will be doing the 30-minute Q&A. The Q&A is already in the chat there for you. And remember, the super chats, PayPals, and Cash Apps, these will get priority. And if they fill up the whole 30 minutes, the free chat questions may not get answered. So if you have something you really want answered, send it through one of those options, and we'll make sure it gets asked. All right. And finally, thank you to both the debaters for being here tonight and bringing your perspectives to the arena. So whenever one of you is ready to start up the open hour, I will start the timer with your voice.
Yeah. So when we're talking about, it almost seemed like you made my argument for you when you were talking about like LA and California, that it kind of negates the votes of people in the Central Valley or other more rural parts of California. Just so if we're looking at on a national level, how many cities and by what margin do you think somebody would need to win, like a presidential candidate would need to win, that would just negate the like everyone else in the country? Like if they got 100% of the vote in New York City, or like let's say they got 100% of the vote in New York City, Chicago, LA, and we'll count the metro areas, right? So not the suburbs and stuff of all of that too. They got 100% of the vote in those three cities. How, like, do you think that would push them over the top?
I mean, it's possible, depending on, I would have to look at a population map to figure that out. But when you look at how, but but it still goes down to the basic mentality that under a popular vote, the more you have these ideological strongholds in major metropolitan areas, which is like for example, I used to think Boston was a big city, and then I went to Nashville. Major metro. When I initially think of a major metropolitan area, I came to learn my mental image of a major metropolitan area was very small by comparison to other major cities elsewhere. But the mentality is still, you have enough strongholds, well then everybody else voting isn't going to matter what way they go or how many go this way or another, because if you could lock in, say, we can at least guarantee that in these cities we're going to come up with like 30% of the votes we need, well then you've got at least 20+% of people in other parts of the country who are going to go with that party and that candidate no matter what, because that's how they've been conditioned. Because just whether you get rid of the Electoral College or not doesn't break that you have people who are conditioned in areas to just say, yeah, well, I live in Boston, so I vote blue no matter who's running for president. That stuff is not going to get any better. In fact, I think under a popular vote system, a lot of that gets worse, because then it becomes not only is it 1-to-1 with the voting, but now it's like, instead of going like, okay, well, you know what? I went out and voted in New Hampshire. Our electoral votes are going to a Democrat, but you know, we still have other states that are going to balance those out, because, you know, again, maybe Republicans don't campaign in Wyoming as much.
Nobody campaigns in
my personal
Wyoming.
feelings on Wyoming's own existence is a whole other debate entirely. I'm willing to dispute it's even a real place sometimes.
There should be one Dakota. No. So sorry, any North Dakotans or South Dakotans out there.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to add a 51st state, then I think we should just consolidate the Dakotas so we're not doing different math.
And then we don't have to change the flag, right?
Yeah, exactly. Look, we're agreeing on something.
There we go.
And we did it inside of 10 minutes. We're agreeing on something. It's unrelated, but still, hallelujah.
So you said you'd have to look at the population map. So I haven't done this analysis for. I'm a numbers guy. I work with like numbers all day, and I like nerd out on spreadsheets and stuff like that. I haven't done this analysis with the 2024 election yet, just because it's kind of time consuming to do. Although I got the template for it now, I could probably do it a lot faster. But for the 2020 election, if we wanted to say like a presidential candidate was winning 100% of each county, right? So like we'll start like with the largest counties, like the largest county in the country. When I say largest, I'm talking like population size. I'm not talking like acreage. LA County is the largest in the country. So if a candidate won 100% of LA County, that would barely make a dip in the popular vote. In fact, I went through and I looked at it. It takes somebody would have to win to get to 50% of the vote. Somebody would have to win 100% of the 153 largest counties in the nation. And that includes 84 statistical areas. So like that's a metropolitan statistical area. So like Chicago includes like 4 or 5 or more, counties, right? So it's not just like one county. Like LA area includes like, obviously downtown LA, but also like Orange County is counted as part of being in LA as a statistical county or as a statistical area. So somebody would have to actually win 84 of the largest cities, 100% of 84 of the largest cities in the United States. And that actually spreads across 39 states. So once again, even if we look at that, so if somebody were winning 100% of the vote in all those to like control the election, they would still be campaigning more than what's needed for the Electoral College. I mean, Trump only needed 22 states to win the Electoral College. He didn't need a single vote. In fact, he didn't even need to win 100% of the votes in those 22 states. He only needed to win 50% plus one right? Once you pass 50%, it's just like, oh, okay, I'm done, right? Now, obviously, there's some states where it's a battleground, and so you want to make sure your margins are up in those states. But still, I mean, more states would come into play even if we had this popular vote and 100% of 153 largest counties in the country, which are 84 cities. A lot of those cities too, Trump won. So it's not like these cities are all like voting for a Democrat or a Republican. I mean, for me, this isn't even about like the political party's advantage. It's all about just, I think it just doesn't make any sense. And like I said, I mean, the argument that you're making here, it's just the math. It's kind of ludicrous. I mean, let's be honest. If somebody won 100% of 84 of the largest cities, I mean, I couldn't even name like 15 of the largest cities in the U.S. Somebody won 84 of the largest cities. Maybe they should be president, right?
Something strikes me as odd with the populations there, with as far as the numbers. So I want to just make something clear here. Now, when you're saying they would need to win all these dozens and dozens, almost 100 cities to win by popular vote, are we supposing everyone is participating? Supposing if we got rid of are we supposing if there was no electoral college and literally every eligible voter in the country was voting, so everything's on the table, is that where these numbers would be coming into play? Because it might be. I would be inclined to believe it might be a little bit different based on what the actual voter participation and turnout is.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the things is it would be tough to predict how switching to a popular vote would affect turnout, especially when especially if you're looking at partisanship turnout. I think that's just too difficult because I mean, there might be some lower turnout. You might get some lower turnout in what are now swing states, but you might get higher turnout in states like California and the Republican areas where they're like, well, my vote doesn't even matter, or vice versa, right? You might get higher turnout in Wyoming even, right? For people that are just like, what's the point? Like Wyoming's never going to go vote for a Democrat, so why would I even do that? So I just use.
Well, I think in those states, I think you have it can be a very different situation because one party's policies federally may be generally favorable to that state, so they always want to lean towards that direction federally. I don't know enough about the inner minutia of every state's politics to fully flesh that out.
Yeah, that's why I didn't bother with that.
But when it comes down to these cities and this idea that they would have to win almost 100 of these major cities, the only way I think again it's
that's 100, not just win,
it comes down to what the turnout is, and I think. The only way I think a president would conceivably need to win that many cities is if we had some kind of system like Australia where the voting is either mandatory or you pay a fine.
So I think you're kind of you're taking an electoral college view on this analysis, and that's part of the problem. I'm not saying
Well, no, I want to understand exactly what those numbers are based on. Are we assuming? Are we taking the populations and just assuming everybody there votes who can, or are we basing this off of how many people have been voting in those cities in the most recent elections?
Yeah. So like I said, I went through on a county by county basis for 2020. I haven't done this yet for 2024. I had 4 years to do it for 2020, so don't give me a year or so to work on this for 2024. Because I like I said, I'm a numbers nerd. I'm a math nerd. I do this kind of stuff for fun. So LA County had in 2020 4,264,365 votes. So I just took the total votes and went down by the country, and I went to say, okay, well, let's say a candidate won 100% of the vote, right, of LA County. How much of that 100% of the vote of LA County, how much was that? And I'm using counties as kind of like a sub end for like a city, right? Because it's not just winning like in an electoral college where it's 50% plus one that they'd have to win. I'm saying 100%. So every single person who's voting in this city, if every single person had cast a ballot for Joe Biden, right, in LA County, he'd have to take like 84 cities, 100% of the vote for 84 cities to do that. LA County was only like, it was less than 3% of the overall vote, and that is by far like double, like by far the largest county in the entire nation. You know, once we start getting down to counties, you know, like for like Tulsa and Albuquerque, right? Those metropolitan areas are way smaller, but those are still included in this analysis. So if a candidate won, they'd have to win 100% of Tulsa along with 100% of LA to be able to like control the election. And that's the 84 different statistical areas that I'm talking about, right? You know, so like Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, that metropolitan area, that would be included as well, right? So Provo, Orem, Utah, right? They'd have to win 100% of the vote. So they'd have to win all the Mormons along with all the nut jobs in San Francisco. They'd have to win all that to be able to control the election. And that's 104 cities.
I grant, when I think of most like cities, I am thinking like the major metropolitan area, because like in of those cities, because like the way I'm used to it is like you have all these small cities surrounding Boston, but they just politically fold into Boston.
Yeah, you know? that's why I expanded it from just counties to like statistical areas. Because if you just look at like, well, what are the votes within the city limits? I don't think that gives like the full picture, right? Because you're right. That's not what people think of when people think of you know Chicago. They don't think of the Loop, right? The downtown area. They're thinking of the whole thing. Or Boston, right? They're not thinking of the city limits. They're thinking of all that. But like I said, I mean, it's just there aren't, the U.S. population is so spread out. Even with these huge cities like Chicago, Boston, L.A., right? There just aren't enough people there that it just and like I said, these cities they're not voting unanimously. You know, that's one of the things that like when people think. I mean, I haven't watched much of your content, Wicked Wally, but I'm pretty sure you've talked about red states and blue states, right? Before you've used those terms.
Mainly in recent weeks on my content, I've been talking with my fiance about how she should decorate our Warcraft house.
Oh, nice. Are you doing?
And if you are a good numbers guy, I got some DPS charts I could probably fancy you taking a look at.
Yeah, I could. So
let me ask but along this dialogue here, because you've been making something start clicking in my head here, so I just want to try to get into this point where it's still sounding, no matter how much we break down the cities, like the Electoral College is still protecting people's votes in different areas better, because nothing is going to change the fact to me that a popular vote system just encourages more corruption and more electoral fraud, because we have a very unique system. When I look into international relations a lot and I'm looking at elections globally, the majority of countries would have a parliamentary system where it is a popular vote amongst the people. And even in Europe, you have way more allegations of election corruption. You look at in Asian countries where they have parliaments and other representative systems, and they have more corruption there. You look in Africa, look in South America. The systems there are so much more corrupt and so rigged under popular votes. And a lot of those states, they should be hosing down their systems and starting all over again. A lot of those countries' democracies fail routinely. Now,
Well,
as
I mean,
far
I
as
don't think you would necessarily need to change.
when we get rid of because under the Electoral College system, it's like, well, if I'm a corrupt political party and if I throw 1,000,000 votes or 1,000,000 bodies into South Dakota, well, I'm still ultimately only getting what South Dakota is worth on the board. If we have a popular vote system, I can send millions of people into a small state where the security's not going to be as intensive and just get popular votes. I just need to get more than the other guy now.
Well, I mean, with the popular vote, you wouldn't even need to send to other states, right?
Yeah, you can just dump them wherever you want. Send 1,000,000 people to vote in backwoods Georgia, where no one's going to check, where you're going to have probably less voter security requirements. Go send them to these places, because unless you're going to make the voting requirements and the security for elections 100 times better than where we have it currently, not like a popular vote system is even more unrealistic than what we currently have. It's only going to create more problems. It's going to exacerbate the problems we already have. I don't see anything from a point of, within the machinations of the system, how we are making anything logically better.
Well, so first off, I don't think if we look at the 1970 proposal for the Bayes-Seller Amendment, which was one of the most recent efforts to get rid of the Electoral College, it still allowed for the states to run their own elections, which I think is a good thing for that very reason. I think it helps reduce that type of thing. But because obviously, if when you look at other countries that have less reputable things, it's because it's all kind of in one hand. But I mean, you would almost have to as well, because I don't see how would you even have are you gonna have the federal government creating ballots that have city council members on it for in some random city in Bloomington, Illinois, or something like that, right? They're why are we having the federal government do that? We should have the.
It's not realistic with the size of our country and how we subdivide the land in states and then local governments. Yeah,
But you would still
one little rinky-dink federal election office would not be able to print individualized ballots for every county in every state and distribute them accurately on election day.
So imagine the headaches we
would have under a parliamentary system if we had to have snap elections 3 times in a year.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, so I think you would still have to have the elections administered on a state and county level, even if you had a popular vote. But hang on, there's something you said that. Yeah, but I don't and without delving too much into the fraud aspect of it, I don't think people understand okay, it's really easy to commit voter fraud in the United States, but it's even easier to get caught doing it, especially if you're trying to do it at scale, right? So if you think about it and sorry to kind of I know this isn't 100% with the topic, but I mean I think
this is part of the
concern.
Election security issue. So if Easy's good with us getting into the weeds on this for a little bit, I'm fine with it.
I shouldn't be too much, but let's say I wanted to dump 100,000 votes in one county, right, for a specific candidate. Right. Okay. Well, what am I going to have?
Never done before.
Yeah. Well, it would be, and I'm going to explain why it's essentially impossible. So what you would have to do is you would have to have a list of everybody who's registered to vote, and then you would have to take. Okay. Well, there's more people that are registered to vote than actually vote for it, right? So you'd have to find 100,000 people who haven't voted and aren't likely to vote, right? But just because you voted in the past doesn't necessarily mean you won't vote in the future. So let's say you do 100,000 votes and you're able to predict with 99% accuracy, 99% accuracy who will vote, who will actually, like, the people that aren't regular voters, that they actually won't vote in this election, right? So with 100,000, you would still, in that one single county, even if you were able to predict with 99% accuracy, you would have 1,000 additional votes of people duplicate voting, right? Because if that person goes in to vote, right, well, now they're on record of having voted twice, so they're gonna get busted for it. 100%, they're gonna get busted, right? They do this all the time, and that's 1,000 votes in one county. But if we look at like how often this actually happens, it's like per year, it's like 5 or 6 per year. So you're talking about like a 10,000% increase of voter fraud in one county in one election. It would set off like a million red flags, and it would be incredibly obvious that there was shenanigans going on. So I don't even think the fraud thing is that big of a concern. You did say something else.
What if there was a party of necromancers who decided to get votes for their candidate? They're going to cast some necromancy and raise the voting zombies from the dead. Like, here comes 150,000 of the voting undead lining the ballot boxes with their votes for the necromancer party.
Well, I mean, it would still be insanely obvious, because I mean they do check those rolls, and people get caught for doing that stuff all the time. You know what happens sometimes, and a lot of times when people are saying like, "Oh, dead people voted," what happens is grandma gets a ballot, and she early votes, and then she dies before the actual election, and it's like, I mean, I don't know. Do you think we should count that vote if she voted and then she died? I don't know. I would say if I went, even if we did on the day of the election, if I vote for a ballot and I put it in the drop box, in person, I'm voting for it, and then I get in a car accident and die on the way home, should that toss out my vote? I don't know.
If you are alive for them to physically receive your ballot and count it, I would say that's a reasonable standard to say that it would count. But if I get an absentee ballot and I have a heart attack 5 minutes later and die, God forbid, my intent to vote should not matter when someone sees my ballot, especially if it was found by a friend or family member who may not agree with me politically. That's actually more likely to happen with someone I'm related to than anyone I'm actually friends with. But
and granted, I'll admit, I mean, that very specific type of fraud might be kind of difficult to catch, where you have your ballot sitting on there, you die, and your friend walks in and says, "Oh my God, Wicked Wally just died. Oh, here's his ballot. I'm going to fill it out." I don't think that kind of fraud is happening.
That'd be the only day in my life I'd ever vote Democrat.
So yeah, because
at least I know if that happened to me. Like, Millie would like write in Trump. Doesn't matter if Trump can run again. She'd at least just write him in for me and put it in the mailbox.
Well, I kind of have a question that I always ask when I'm talking to people about the Electoral College, that I'm just, for my own personal curiosity, is, do you mind saying who you voted for in 2024?
I voted for Trump. I voted for Trump 3 times.
And see, this is one of the things that I think is very important, because you actually never voted for Trump. You voted for some person who you have no idea, and I would say you're probably, I would probably put you on like above average on like political astuteness, right? Like for people in the nation, I would put myself, I would put SpeakEazy. I think all 3 of us are probably like above average like political awareness, and I would bet money that nobody in the chat knows the names of like any of their electors, right? So nobody's voting for like the electors, right? They're voting for the president, so that's just another thing. So like that was kind of my point with the historical argument, is that nobody really, the electors just aren't serving any purpose anymore other than directly weighting the votes. So
and this is part of the problem, though, with the way the system exists currently, is under the way that the system exists currently, if I'm in one of those 36 states where it's just an automatic electoral vote follows the popular vote, I don't need to, why do I care who the electors are? I don't need to know who they are. I don't need to talk to them. They can't do anything for me. And even if I'm in one of those minority states where they could, because the system is over 50% broken, because over 25 states just default the popular vote to the electoral vote, well, those other 14 states of electors really aren't going to do anything to help me either, because could they, by the numbers, completely disqualify or overturn an election? Maybe, but my guess would be probably not very likely, and they're not. And
Well,
clearly,
I mean,
the way the precedent has shifted under a broken system, they're not likely to try. And I don't fault the electors for that. The system's been broken by legislation, and we're not trying to fix it.
I mean, the names of the electors, they're all publicly available prior, because it's all decided by, like, before in a state.
And this is an interesting point to the voter fraud that I wanted to connect back to, is that it's all publicly available, and as I learned in 2016, so was whether or not I voted, because I received a letter in the mail in 2016, about a month or two before the election, listing off that I had what elections I had previously voted in my state. And basically, it was this group alerting people to hey, these are your neighbors who are likely to participate in the election. Was this some group that was probably trying to intimidate people into voting for Hillary? Maybe. But clearly, they were at least able to get the voter roll and see who was registered in my state. What elections have they been present for? Didn't say who I voted for, but it said I voted. So clearly they can at least work out who is most likely to vote or not, and then they can just play the odds with everybody else who's not a likely voter, especially if they can see reliably, didn't vote in 2024, didn't vote in the 22 midterm, didn't vote in 2020. Well, I think we can harvest their ballot.
Yeah, I mean, you might be able to get away with this doing it like 10 or, maybe 20 at a time. But I think once you start trying to do it at scale, it's just, the numbers it's absurd. I mean, you would have to have like omniscience to be able to like figure out, to be able to know. Because once you try to do this at scale, even if you're 99%, even if you're 99.9% accurate, right? Like I said, in any given year, across all elections, there's like 5 or 6 people that vote that are duplicate voters, right? And that's almost always intentional.
If we're talking strictly, if we were switched to a popular vote, it doesn't matter if it all works. Across every state, any place I can get ballots in the ballot box, it's like you just have to create enough holes in the system that your attempts to breach the security wall, enough of them are going to get through. You just need enough bodies to get through.
Even if you were able to do that, I think there's like something like 3,000 counties. You'd only be able to do this like maybe like 20 at a time. That's 60,000 votes.
In order to do that, you would probably have to be a nationally based political party with a ground operation in every single state that works in every election in that state.
Yeah, so you're talking about
we have two of those. We have 2 of those parties at least.
So yeah, but essentially you're risking. I mean, because we both agree, like the penalties for this are huge. So you're talking about like this massive exposure where you're doing this but it's really easy to get caught. If you're talking about this massive exposure to like, because you're doing it 60,000 times, right? And you're talking about shifting like 0.04% of the national vote, like that just it's not reasonable. I mean, maybe
we know it's possible, but we know it's possible because the results of the audit in Arizona were not good.
I mean, I don't want to get into that. The Cyber Ninjas audit they didn't find anything. And the same with. If you want to get into 2,000 mules, I reached out to True the Vote, and they lied to me. Well, they didn't lie to me, but they basically admitted that if there were fraud, that they're covering it up. So.
From the numbers I had seen when it was being presented to the state of Arizona, those numbers show that it's like, yeah, if you throw enough at the wall by volume, eventually it's like, you can have a really tight net, but if I'm throwing like needles at it by the hundreds of thousands, eventually some needles are going to make it through those holes in the net. Now, you may catch a lot of them, but there's going to be more and more flowing through that you're also going to miss.
You would have to be like completely perfect in knowledge of who's actually going to vote and who's not. Like you can't make a guess and be like 80% right. You'd have to be like 99.999% right on every single guess, right? That's just the mathematics of it are just insane. You couldn't do that. It would be obvious. Even if you were 99.9% accurate and you try to do this like for 10,000 votes, you're talking like doubling or tripling, or I think that one's like, let's see, 100,000 votes, 99,100 votes. You'd be talking about like more votes, like more like duplicate vote fraud than like happens in the entire like nation in one county. And just where's the evidence of that, right? Because it's obvious. They'd be caught. I mean, you can look at the records and be like, Joe Schmo, you voted by ballot, and Joe Schmo, you voted in person. Like, what's going on with that? And they would go to the house. Where are these people that are being charged with that are saying, I only voted once, I swear, right? Because I mean, we're talking, if we're like doubling or tripling the number of people where that happens to, the vast majority of those people just plead guilty because they know that they're guilty, like in any normal years. But the voter fraud thing is just, it's not a huge concern. Like it's just, and I know people say it is,
but where we are being focused right there on like one very specific, basically method that you could go about it. That's not going to be what anyone is only going to try to do.
Well,
people are going to try to get more votes in the box by anything possible. Like whether you have to import people or raise the dead or do something else.
Then the voter rolls are going to be off. Then the voter rolls are going to be off, right? It's a double entry system, right? You have the voter roll and then you have the vote tallies, right? And so the voter rolls are the people that are registered to vote, and then you mark off so-and-so said they voted, so-and-so said they voted, so-and-so said they voted, right? And you tally those numbers up, and then you have the ballots. Well, if you dump 100,000 ballots and you don't account for that on the voter roll side, well, now you have 100,000 more ballots than are on the voter rolls. That's why you have to go through this game of figuring out who actually can, who's actually not going to vote, but is registered to vote, right? Like, so it's just, and then you have to make that prediction and pray that they don't actually vote, right? And you have to be like almost perfectly knowledgeable about what's going on with that in order to pull that off without getting caught. But we can get off of the voter fraud thing right now because, yeah, I don't want to. That's not what this is about. About the historical aspect of it, I mean, people like Madison were advocating for the national popular vote in the Constitutional Convention. He pushed for that. So I mean, this isn't a new idea, right? I mean, some concerns that you actually brought up are kind of similar to what Madison said. And Madison said, "Well, I think it's a concern, but I think that it's actually better for the nation if we ignore it." And that was basically Madison's concern was, well, because there were basically three factions in the Constitutional Convention. There was the National Popular Vote faction, there was the Congress faction where Congress picks the president, and then there was the state legislatures where the state legislatures pick the president, right? So there was those three factions that were kind of vying for it, and they didn't actually settle on it until right before the end of the Constitutional Convention. In fact, that's actually what Madison says in 1820s. He's like, look, we were tired. We're at the end of the thing, and we had to come up with something. So everyone was just tired, and so everyone just kind of was like, all right, let's just pick something, right? And that's why they didn't settle on the Electoral College until September of the convention, a week and a half, 2 weeks before it ended. But Madison's concern was, he was like, look, we should have a national popular vote, but there's a problem in, when you're looking at it compared to the Congress aspect, because they'd already settled, they already had the Great Compromise, which was where the 3/5 compromise, right? They'd already settled on that. So he was like, well, southern states have this this overrepresentation compared to the eligible voters in their state, because they count for the slaves in their state, versus northern states, which don't really have that. So there might be like some discrepancy, like, right? So a greater percentage of the people in New York could vote versus people, if we're counting the slaves in like Virginia, right? And Madison was from Virginia, and he was like, well, this is a concern, right? Because that theoretically, when people talk about like, oh, well, New York could outvote Virginia. Well, part of that was because Virginia heavily restricted who could vote by, say, like huge classes of people couldn't vote. Compared to, in New York, there was more suffrage was more widely accepted there. And that's kind of similar to what you're saying, a more modern analogy would be like some states let, felons after they serve their sentence vote. That's kind of a more modern analogy to that concern. But Madison, let me see if I have the quote here, because he talks directly about that, and I think it's right here. He said that this disproportion will be continually decreasing under the influence of the Republican laws in the southern states with a more rapid increase. And he says that local considerations must give way to the general interest. That's what Madison says when he was arguing in the convention. Like, look, we should just have a national popular vote. Yeah, this is one of the concerns. He's like, but look, I'm from Virginia, and I understand that this is that this theoretically could hurt me, if we let the Congress pick the president. But I think it's more important for the nation if the office of presidency, which is it's a national office, if we vote on that office nationally. That was Madison arguing for that, right? So, like I said, the national popular vote idea is not new. It's not some crazy thing. Like Madison, the guy who wrote like 90% of the Constitution, that's what he was saying.
And when he's speaking of that, we should keep in mind he's speaking at a time when they would ultimately be in the direction of, well, we are managing who is eligible to vote. You had to meet certain requirements. It wasn't just that you were a white male. So if a popular vote, if you have to meet requirements, and a popular vote is not just every single person of a certain age gets a vote, then yeah, you would probably have a lot better time managing a popular vote system under a managed democracy. But for the purposes of policy, yeah, that's not what we have anymore. We are talking about the college in a day and age of universal suffrage. Now,
I mean,
I'm gonna try very hard to not get into that side of the pool, because we only got 21 minutes left, and we could do a whole different debate about universal suffrage.
Yeah.
But that's a separate conversation. But the other key factor at that time is that the majority of the United States had not been settled at the foundation of the country. There was a whole Midwest and West where we didn't have that many people yet, and that really we didn't even have much of a governing authority until the railroad was built.
Actually, I don't know if that was at that time. I don't know. My understanding was that at the time of the Articles of the, I don't even know if the U.S. had like the Ohio Territory at the founding.
Exact. That's why I say there was
under
still
the
this
Articles
whole
of
other
it was the
large chunk of the country to the west of the Mississippi, at the very least, that we hadn't contended with yet.
But well, I mean, that wasn't part of the
existence.
U.S. That wasn't part of the U.S. at the time.
No, it wasn't. But at the time, you could probably look at the lay of the land and foresee, like, hey, under this current system where we're all on one coast primarily, and we're all kind of we're all kind of concentrated for the most part, then you could see where they could have said, well, yeah, maybe this could work. But then the more you spread out the population, then it becomes a greater issue of, well, how do we make sure these territories and their residents are equally represented and that their vote is being protected to some extent.
Well, my understanding, I don't know how much the territorial law of the United States has changed over time, but I'll admit 100%, like, I'm not, like, super, that's pretty niche. But my guess is it would probably have been similar to, like, Puerto Rico, where they just don't get a vote for president. Right? Like, when it was the Louisiana Territory or the Utah Territory, I don't think the residents of them I don't think they had electoral college representation or congressional representation. My guess is it would probably be similar to Puerto Rico and Guam.
Well, it would be, I'm not 100% sure on how that worked myself, but just like looking at it historically, like as late as as post-Reconstruction, there was no federal or state authorities in places like Utah. Those areas were still being settled.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of people go out west, and then after them came what they would refer to as the carpetbaggers. You know, the government officials being sent out there to civilize the Dakota Territory so that you're all not just carrying around 6-shooters and relying on the sheriff.
Yeah.
It would be hard for them to vote when there was no government authority there to facilitate the actual elections unless they sent somebody.
Well, I mean, I don't think they voted until they formed essentially until they were accepted into the union, and then they had the government infrastructure kind of, they elected and voted on the government infrastructure locally to do that. Right? Like, I don't think
when you're settling a town, when you're in a town that's like, when you're settling a new frontier town in Nevada, it's federal election for president, little bit difficult to participate in.
Well, I don't even know if they
can all gather around and decide amongst yourselves who's sheriff.
Like, I don't think legally I don't think that was a concern. Because I'm saying I don't think legally they could have voted for that. I mean, like, if you think about it, like in the Texas Republic, in the Republic of Texas, could they have voted for president? Probably not. Right. So yeah, I don't.
If I were to just guess on like the whole jumble of dates and the electoral status when the country was being settled, which is a uniquely niche aspect of election history I'm not well versed on, but my inference would be the votes being counted from those residents was probably tied to whether or not that territory had proper statehood at that time or not.
Well, yeah, then it wouldn't be a territory; it'd be a state.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying that, like, in the territories, I don't think, I don't think at the writing of the Constitution, I don't even know if they had territories at that point. I think we didn't even get like the Ohio Territory until after the War of no, that's not true because.
But whether we have a territory or a state wouldn't change the fact that when people move there and they do start participating in elections, and the elections now impact that area, like 10,000 people who decide to migrate from Boston to Minnesota are going to have a much different set of needs than they used to have now that they're settling this new area. Yeah. And it's important that they're able to articulate those needs to the officials who are supposed to be representing them, and that they're not just overruled and ignored by the people remaining on the East Coast saying, well, we're still here, we're more important, and there's more of us, so the hell with them.
Well, I think if we were to have a national popular vote for president, I don't think that would like destroy federalism. I'm still a big fan of federalism. I think that's a good. I think it's a good system, especially for as large as we are. And I think there's a lot of advantages to federalism. I do kind of tend to side with Madison in that liking a more national, considering ourselves as one nation, because that was another thing too. Is like at the time, they didn't. If you read like the early Federalist Papers, one of the big things is they're like, look, we had to have this Constitution because if we're going to be, if the United States of America is going to be successful as a country, we have to think of ourselves as one nation. And they didn't at the time. That was part of the reason for that was one of the arguments and against the Electoral College at the founding was like, look, someone from New Jersey would never ever vote for somebody from New York, right? That was the concern at the time, because they were like, no, if you're from New Jersey, you're not from the United States of America, you are from New Jersey. In fact, that's actually fascinating that it's actually reflected in our language. In the original, when people talked about the United States, like in George Washington's first address, he didn't say the United States is, he said the United States are, right? Because it was the conception, the way people conceptualized the country was, we're 13 different nations that are grouped together. But Madison was like, if in Hamilton, we're like, look, if we're going to be successful, we have to get to ourselves to become thinking of ourselves as one nation. And it wasn't until after the Civil War that changed. And then people, during the Civil War, people started to, say the United States is, and then it kind of picked up after, during Reconstruction. But I mean, that was one of the
parts. It's amazing we were able to heal all of that division with the Electoral College still in place. Who'd have thought?
Well, I mean, that's once again, my issue with the Electoral College causing division was, it's not that the Electoral College itself is causing division, because they didn't have
I would hope not, because it's not a living thing. It can't do anything on its own.
They didn't have, they didn't have TV in 1866, right? Or 1868, I guess would have been the next election after that. They didn't have TV in 1866 and 1868, and I don't think they had colored printers to. I don't know if they used printed colored newspapers when they did tried to print electoral maps, right? And TV didn't come out until the 1950s, and then it wasn't color until the 1960s, right? And so, but from the 1960s until 2000, they did have different. My issue with that was that they did have different colors, and I think people just if you create a really easy us versus them mentality, right? I mean, imagine in this country if everybody who voted for Harris had to wear blue shirts every single day, right? And everybody who voted for Trump had to wear red shirts or a red hat every single day, right? They had to, right? So every time you go out, you see, and if you voted for Trump, can you wear a red hat? If you voted for Harris, can you wear a blue shirt, right? If you looked at, so imagine how much division that would cause, right? That would just everyone is like, oh, someone with a red hat cut me off. Oh, those damn Republicans, right? That just kind of stuff just flows naturally, right? Because
I would say a lot of people love to advertise who they vote for already of their own volition. Yeah. A lot of people don't need a law to do that. The only people who don't probably follow that would be the people who wear neither and say everybody sucks.
But my point with that is that you have the, with the way that the Electoral College is done, with the winner take all system, is when people think of a blue state, nobody is thinking of the 40% of the people that voted for Trump. And that's 40% of the people of the largest state in the country that people are just discounting. Because they're like, it's a blue state.
It's always usually well known, especially amongst conservatives. It's generally well known. There is a very large conservative base in California, but they've gotten less and less effective within the state over time. At one point, they were getting conservative governors elected, and then in the past 20 years or so, they really have lost a lot of traction on the state level, and that's why California has gone increasingly down the shithole, because they've kind of leaned away from, hey, let's have some conservative officials to at least balance everything and stem the tide of all the bad shit we do, to just leaning full, let's just run everything into the ground under our ideology as hard as we can ride it till it's definitely dead.
I want to give you two statements, and I'm curious to see what you would say is the more divisive of these two statements. Okay. Blue state sucks. Okay, that's statement one. 53% of the people in this state suck. Which do you think is more divisive?
I would say both could be true, and both would probably be equally divisive, depending on who you say them to.
Well, yeah. But what if you?
Especially if I say that in Massachusetts, it's gonna piss someone off. Either one is gonna piss somebody off. The odds are in my favor to piss someone off if I go south of here and say blue states suck or this percentage of the state sucks. Chances are the person I'm talking to falls into that.
But my point is that, like, when you just have this, it's like it having the blue and red distinction. It creates like sports teams, right? That happens all the time with a sport team, right? You don't think every player on your team is the greatest player in the in the league or whatever, right? But and you don't like you don't like the people of the other team, but they don't. You understand, like, you can rationalize it and you can think about it, but it's just when you're in the moment and you're at the game, it's kind of hard, right? But when you have this blue, red, it creates this easy kind of like sticking point, right?
Yeah,
it's this
but
easy
then again,
mechanism.
it's like without the Electoral College, you've just had parties always align with some kind of symbolism. Like before, like they've always had different mascots, or we used to have, it was elephant versus donkey. Now we don't really seem to dwell on that much. We've just kind of simplified it to
blue
red versus blue.
And
you don't need an electoral college to have tribalism. You don't need an electoral college or like an upper system to exacerbate tribalism. Sports fans are tribalistic without the playoffs, without a Super Bowl or like a World Series. Sports fans are tribalistic enough without championships. Yeah, Wrestling fans are tribalistic. Gamers are tribalistic.
Okay. Do you think Kentucky? Would you say Kentucky is a red state or a blue state?
Generally speaking, my perception of it politically would be from the news that it's generally right-leaning, but my perception of a lot of people I've talked to is that it's been pretty mixed from people who are there. I've talked to just as many Democrats and liberals there as I have conservatives.
They have a Democratic governor, right? But they clearly voted for Trump in 2024.
Oh,
right?
that's not a foreign concept to me, because you used to see this a lot, and you still do in a lot of states. This was a common thing in Massachusetts until around 2010, when all political balance in the state elections went out the window. Yeah, Massachusetts would vote for the Democratic candidate overwhelmingly, but when it came to the state elections, Massachusetts had a long run of conservative governors who did very well here, and we also had Mitt Romney, who I apologize about all the time. As a former resident of Massachusetts, I apologize for Mitt Romney regularly.
So I mean, but I mean that's the thing, is that when you
the
Electoral
we
College,
had an understanding. The political culture in the state for a very long time was like, it was good to have some kind of balance. If you have a majority left legislature, have a right-leaning governor, or vice versa. Have some kind of political balance.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to a federal election, the states go the way they go. But now, I would actually say the real political division has come from that concept going farther and farther out the window in society. States don't strive to have some kind of balance internally anymore politically. They don't say, hey, we'll have our left-leaning lawmakers, but let's have a Republican there as the governor to check that. We don't know. Instead, you have parties who just want to run the whole state, and when they have the opportunity, in a lot of those cases, especially the Democrats, run those states into the ground.
Well,
And then they're just building up their political machines in those states for when they have a federal election so that they can throw as much support behind their presidential candidate as possible.
So I mean that was kind of, you know, like the whole idea that yeah, when you actually dig into the states, every state is complicated. Every state has this complex push and pull of everything, right? But my point is that, like, most people don't know that, right? If you're not from Kentucky, how many people know that Kentucky has a Democrat governor? Nobody. I would probably bet most of the people don't, and the rest of the country don't know that, right? And but they
don't think about it because depending on
right.
what part of the country, like if I told you, oh, Massachusetts has a Democratic governor, you would probably, most people would think and be inclined to think correctly, oh, that person's probably a far left nutcase, and she is. But if I'm talking about, if you were to tell me, oh, the governor of Georgia or the governor of Mississippi is a Democrat, I would be inclined to think, okay, I'm surprised, but depending on the area of the country they're from, maybe that person's more of like an older school Southern Democrat where they would still have some more conservative notions to their policies than not. But I think that's becoming increasingly rare too.
Yeah,
and it's to the detriment of a lot of those states that it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, then the states are the laboratory of democracy. That's the saying, right? So, you know, I'm all for that. If states want to try stuff, I'm all for that. You know, and try different things out, right? You know, within reason. I don't think, you know.
This is why I think if we
evaluated
the feasibility of a state level electoral college to add a layer to the system, that I think it would actually legitimize the federal electoral system more if every state had their electoral votes determined in the same manner.
Do you think? What if you had? Would you be in favor of having like an electoral college for your city, where certain streets got like more of a vote than other streets?
Well, now a city is on a very small scale. So when you're
hey, people that live on cul-de-sacs have different concerns than people that live in an apartment.
College for a town or city, probably not. But when you're but the more you expand your territory, the more you have to have better controls in place for how you're going to govern, because you have to cover a larger swath of land and you have to cover a larger population. That's a big reason I have said, for one reason or another, that a parliamentary system here would not work on a federal level. We're too damn big of a landmass to shut down for snap elections every 3 months if people can't agree.
Well, so my point with the looking at the city was, I mean, I think we would agree that somebody who lives in a cul-de-sac is going to have different concerns regarding their city than somebody who lives in an apartment complex, right?
Well, it would depend on how the city is laid out. I mean, a lot of cities, are you more likely to just see cul-de-sacs, or are you more likely to see a sprawl of buildings and skyscrapers and high-rise office and apartment buildings where you got millions of people stacked on top of each other like they're ants in an ant farm? That's what you're more likely to see. You're not going to, it's not like in the middle of, say, Boston, you have, here's this nice little cul-de-sac area, but then that's right next to all like the crack houses.
Or maybe it's like a row house or something like that, you know? But the
that's where you get into more of like those borough neighborhood areas where it's like, yeah, maybe you'll see like townhome looking places in like South Boston, but in the middle of Boston proper, no, there's nothing but people packed ass to elbow.
Yeah, so but the thing is, I don't think anybody would really advocate for implementing the Electoral College on the state level or on the city level, because they understand like it's kind of ridiculous. Why should someone else's vote for mayor count more than mine? So,
all right, that is going to wrap up the open floor back and forth. Excellent exchanges from both sides tonight. We're now going to enter into the final phase of the debate, closing statements. Quick reminder to the live chat here The Q&A is there in the chat. All right. So if you've got questions for either debater, make sure you drop them in now. And remember, the super chats, PayPal, Cash App, these get priority. And if they fill up the 30 minutes, not all the free chats questions will get answered. So if you want to make sure something's guaranteed to be asked, send it through one of those priority options. But there's not too many tonight, so I think you'll be safe putting some in there. With that said, we're going to move into closings. Each debater gets 5 minutes to make their final case. We're going to start here with bass guitar. So, bass guitar, whenever you're ready, I will start the timer up with your voice. Let me get the timer on here for you. All right, yeah. Whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer up with your voice.
Yeah. So in my opener, I kind of talked about a couple different things. First off, I pointed out that the Electoral College doesn't function as it historically did, and the concerns for the Electoral College that the electoral led to the Electoral College don't really apply today. And the Electoral College doesn't serve the function that it originally did, and it seemed that we agreed on that. And then I also pointed out that in even more modern context, that it doesn't that the idea that big cities or something like that would control all the elections. I didn't really hear any rebuttal of that when we dug into the numbers. Like, right, we talked about how like kind of absurd it was. You'd have to have like 100% of the vote in like 80 cities across 30, 40 states in order to like control the election. We didn't really have any, rebuttal of that. We pointed out, we talked a little bit at the end about the constituencies, and we seemed like we kind of agreed that in cities it doesn't really make sense to have an electoral college type system. But that maybe because if the cities were really large, maybe it would, I guess. There's that. We spent quite a bit talking about the us versus them mentality. I still maintain that I think looking simply as like red or blue, I think that just simplifies things too much. And it creates this easy mechanism for us to divide ourselves by saying, oh, this person's from a blue state, without looking more deeply, like we kind of talked about. Well, hey, this state is actually a lot more complex than just red or blue, right? But by having this mental image of the Electoral College map and having this where each state has to be red or it has to be blue, right? That simple mechanism, I think it really does just stick in people's minds. And think about that. The next time you hear somebody say something like, oh, that red state or that blue state, think about that and think like, actually, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But then think about like, well, why are they saying red or blue, right? Nobody's talking about Georgia being blue, despite them having a pretty mixed, both of their senators are Democrats. I think right now, I think Warnock and Ossoff, I think they're both still in office. So both of them are Democrats. So why are we calling Georgia red? Or it just it doesn't really make sense. And so I want to reiterate. I mean, this idea is not new. This is something that James Madison, who is the author of the Constitution, this is something that he pushed for. And in 1820, he recognized like that the Electoral College was broken in 1820, and he said like, yeah, we need to change this. And he had tossed out some ideas for that and letters that he wrote to different people. He wrote some letters to Jefferson about it. He wrote some letters to a guy named George Hayes, who was pushing for an amendment to reform the Electoral College. But this is it's not new, is what I'm getting at. Like, this is something that's been around since the inception of the country, since before the Constitution, right? It was in the Constitutional Convention that this is what was being pushed for by some of the big names, I think, in the convention. And I just want to remind people of in the preamble to the Constitution, it says that the purpose of the Constitution is to form a more perfect union. And ask yourself, does counting some people's votes more than others, right? Especially when people don't really consider their state identity like huge anymore. People used to think about things like I would never move from New York. I'm a New Yorker. I would never move to New Jersey. People do that all the time. Or I'm from Massachusetts. I would never move to New Hampshire, right? Because that's like moving to a different country, right? Nobody thinks about stuff like that. And I think that's a good thing, because that was the whole purpose of the Constitution, was to help us become one nation. And I think we're there, but we still have this vestige of this old mentality where we're 13 different nations that are trying to make it work. We're not there anymore. We are one nation. Everybody here agrees. Well, we're one nation, and I think that's fulfilling the promise and the goal of the framers of the Constitution. And so I think that we should. I'll say again. We should keep expanding power to we the people and fulfill Jefferson's promise and Madison's promise. And I think we the people should vote and elect directly and equally for the President of the United States.
All right. Thank you for that closing statement, Base. And now we're going to hand it over to Wicked Wally. Whenever you're ready for your closing statement, I will start the timer up with your voice.
So I came in here as in the negative, open to the fact that bass guitar may have had a persuasive argument or something I have not heard before that would be so powerful and mind-blowing that we should ditch this system that we have, as we agree, we agree that it does not work as it was originally intended, but I say that because we broke that system. Legislation in multiple states broke the system on purpose and has broken it worse and worse. Now, instead of fixing that, instead of reforming it, his position is, well, let's just accelerate the extinction of it and defenestrate it out the highest window we possibly can, so it splatters in as many directions as it can across the street, and we can never put it back together again. Instead, I think everything that he has said about cities and how we have divvied up everything makes actually the perfect case for why we should reform the system in the spirit of transitioning to having a state electoral college system underneath the federal electoral college system, because it would actually easily fulfill the role of adding the further legitimacy that people have seemed to push a narrative since 2000 that the Electoral College suddenly lacks. And let's point that out. And I think this would be the most fitting way to end this is, that was really when the conversation about the Electoral College's legitimacy started. Over Florida, over Bush versus Gore. Suddenly, 2000 became the time that when people on the left did not get their way under the electoral system, which is exactly what the electoral system is there to do, is to be a bulwark against a horde of people just trying to get their way and affect everyone else in the country who's not in their group. Suddenly the system lacked legitimacy. But yet, lo and behold, when Obama won in 2008, the Electoral College system works. It's a perfect system. We should never change it. Yeah, those words sounded really easy to Democratic voters who had just gotten their way in 2008 and were going to get it again in 2012. In 2016, the electoral system didn't work again. It worked again in 2020. It didn't work again last year. The narrative that we have had over the Electoral College not working seems to always be predominantly pushed by Democrat voters on social media and who go on news programs and want to pontificate about how bad the system is and that the merits of the system fail because their candidate lost underneath it. That seems to be where the 25 years of crying and complaining has come from. We didn't hear that in the 90s. We didn't hear it in the 80s. We've heard it the last 25 years that the Electoral College system is busted. and it's a narrative that's only ever seems to come from one side, because when the Republican candidates lost, and maybe it was in no part of the fact that the people we ran against Obama both times were terrible candidates, we accepted the results and said that's the fucking system we live under, and that's the system we vote under, and that's the system the founders ultimately intended for us to have. It always seems the narrative of how the system lacks legitimacy has always only come from one side. And with that, we've proven there's no good time to ever end a debate, but we got to end it here.
All right. Thank you for that closing statement, Wicked Wally. And that concludes the closing statements. Great work from both debaters tonight. All right. If you're enjoying what you're seeing, okay, make sure you not only like the stream, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the debates we host here on the Swords of Reason. All right. Run all kinds of matchups, like I said, political debates, cultural debates, social issues, philosophy, trending topics, video games, all types of stuff, right? If there's a conversation worth clashing over, we bring it in the arena. And don't forget to subscribe to tonight's debaters as well, all right? Their links are in the description. Show them some support for stepping into the arena, sharpening their arguments in front of you guys tonight, all right? Whether you agreed or disagreed. All right. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna move in to the Q&A portion. But before I start the timer for the chat Q&A, I always like to ask a question to each debater myself. It'll be usually based on things I heard or arguments I want clarified or points I think maybe people missed or deserve another pass. But so the one I'm actually gonna for this one, I'm actually gonna ask you both the same question. So if you had to give the one how would I say this? The one strongest point you have that is against the other side, which would it be? Like the one strongest argument you have against the other side, what would it be? And we'll start with base.
To steelman the other side, or
no. So your
my
what do
yeah.
you feel like out of your arguments you made tonight? What was your strongest one that is like the best reason to get rid of the Electoral College, like the main one?
It's that it doesn't actually do what people say that it does.
Okay. All right. Right to the point. I like it. You have anything for that, Wally, before you answer the same?
Oh, like I've maintained, it doesn't. He says it doesn't do what people believe it does, but he doesn't include the fact that it doesn't do that because the system has been willfully broken by people in office. 36 states willfully broke the system and made it progressively more and more broken.
I mean,
so
do you think it was broken? Do you think it was broken in 1800 when Jefferson pressured Virginia to go to a winner-take-all system, and then all the other states followed?
Oh, if they had, I think that was against the spirit of the system. I don't think he should have done that. They had very good reasons for ultimately implementing it the way it was. I don't think it should be winner-take-all. You can't. As again, we see how huddled masses behave when they don't get their way. And I don't see how getting rid of the Electoral College would make us any less politically divisive or would make our elections any more secure. To also answer your question there, Easy.
Yeah. All right. That's fair. All right. Thank you both for that answer. I like it. Both of you get right to it. So we're gonna start up this timer. Remember, chat. The super chats will get priority, but there's not too many here. So if you don't have a question in the Q&A yet, get one in there now. Okay.
You've been a
But
fun opponent, by the way, Base. Just want to let you
Oh,
know.
thanks.
This has been fun.
Yeah, I debated Rob Noor on this topic like a year and a half ago. That was
I talked with him about that actually last
really?
week,
Nice.
believe it or not.
I ran into him like a couple months ago, and he was cool about it. He said
Yeah, because
he said I would change my opinion if a Republican won the popular vote, and I went up to him, I made a point. I was like, no, Rob, I still think we need to get rid of the Electoral College. He was like, okay.
yeah, I could have sworn when Easy gave me the debate, I could have sworn I'm like, I think I've heard your name before. Like I couldn't necessarily place it. That's why I mean, I've watched Rob for like about as long as I've watched Andrew, so I wanted to check with him. I'm like, is he somebody I remember from like the Twitch panel days or something? And Rob's like, he's been around a bit. I've debated him before. I'm like, okay, I'm not crazy. I didn't make this guy up.
that's what's up. That's what's up. All right, let's get this timer going. First super chat we got here from Call Me GL comes in for $5. Says appreciate you, team. Appreciate you as well. Thank you, GL. Uh, big appreciation for the support. Uh, Next one comes in $10 from Prince of Dogs. Says love and support, brother. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Prince. We got for the goal, not one step back. Giving women the right to vote was a bad idea. For $10 from Tay Gooch. Shout out to you, Tay Gooch. Did any of you have anything for that?
I tried very hard to keep it on this specific policy, or we could have gone down the eligible voter road all night and never discussed the electoral college.
I mean, I think there's a good argument to have. I think some of the tests that were applied, like especially like in Reconstruction, I think were like intentionally made to like go after a specific group of people. I think that's obvious. But I think there is an argument. I don't think that same condition would apply today. I would be in favor of actually something instead of just like kind of a universal suffrage. I would be. I wouldn't be opposed to something like everybody having to pass the civics test that U.S. Naturalized citizens have to pass. Although they only get asked like 20 of the questions. I'd say give them all 100 and make people pass that.
You know what? At least that's something. Before we even get into more of like people holding a stake in society, you're most of the way with agreeing with me on the suffrage thing. So I think we can skip a full debate on it.
Yeah. Although I would say one thing about like doing something like that, like kind of bringing back the suffrage a little bit. I don't think if you're not forcing people to vote, I think people that are just kind of like not interested and not aware of that stuff, I think they're going to self-sort out anyways. So I don't think it's like a huge issue. But I wouldn't be opposed to something like, having to pass a citizenship test or the civics test.
Based.
I like it. Next one we got is 20 comes in from Kokomo. Says, can't stick around. Have a good one, fellas. Thank you, Kokomo. I appreciate the support big time. Then we got $2 comes in from Barrett, dropping some axes for Wally. Let's go. Appreciate that big time. Then we got a 20 from Mr. B. Says, we clash our swords of reason. Fuck yeah. Appreciate that, Mr. B. Then we got Prince of Dogs again for $5. Get those chats in with your questions and to reach the goal. Facts. I appreciate that, Dogs. All right, so that's it for super chats. A little, you guys leaving a little lonely on the super chats tonight, but
I think
we got.
Had a break. I think everyone had a breakthrough and realized they can just send you money, and I don't have to talk no more if they don't ask a question.
True. But there is some questions here in the Q&A. First question we got is from Re-Examination Show. Shout out to Base. I'm the Christian from the Wilson debate. Yeah,
Oh,
he's
yeah. Hey,
the
what's up,
one
man?
that
I
like
saw you.
debated the 1 versus 5.
Oh, I saw you. Yeah.
So there will
I
be
remember
another
him.
debate coming
What's
with
up?
him and Andrew probably in the new year. Andrew's so busy,
Hmm.
especially this month, that we're
That
probably
was
gonna
where
have
I
to
ran
wait
into
till the new
Rob.
year.
Was at that Wilson debate.
But yeah, I'm probably
We'll talk
gonna.
to him sometime in February.
Yeah, they're probably gonna be talking sometime in the new year. But I'm gonna make it happen. I'll make it happen. But it says, um, how does getting rid of the Electoral College not favor the richest areas and enslave the agricultural sector?
Well, I mean, so like I said, the agricultural sector is already kind of screwed, right? I mean, the largest state almost completely, essentially disenfranchises their, I'm using that term loosely. All their like agricultural sector, the state that produces the most, that has the largest agriculture sector, which is California. So the Electoral College already does that. Um,
It has, does it have the largest agricultural sector by size or by
by
the
size.
population of farmers?
By
Because
size.
like you look at all the Midwestern, you look at a lot of other states, like there's a lot of farmland.
Oh yeah,
Probably more farmland than there is just in California.
yeah, but I mean, most of the production and the numbers are just so much smaller.
And you know what would be a great way to re-enfranchise that farming sector in California? A state electoral college system.
I'm sorry to cut into the Q&A, but by that do you mean just like proportionate allocation of the electoral college, or are you talking about like, I don't know what you mean by like an electoral college?
Well, how we would act, I mean, I would just envision that broadly, because I've never had, it's not like I've had like 2 hours with someone where we've in depth like fleshed out a state system in particular and what that would look like. So it's like a state electoral college is almost like, I think in a sense it's like I'm giving you my particular definition of Christian nationalism here, but I would say broadly you could at least start with having with basically you could divvy up the electoral votes in the state by county and distribute them that way. Or you can just have it be based on which candidate wins the most counties or the most districts in that state. Either, I'm open to having a conversation on either way. I think those are basically the only two ways you could realistically implement it that people could get on board with.
Yeah. You're muted. Speaking. Sorry.
Wouldn't be a speakeasy show if I didn't talk on mute at least once.
I just do the Hogan ear because I think that does a lot more than yelling, "You muted."
The Vigilante TV comes in, says the Electoral College creates a system where a vote in Montana's vote. Wait, yeah, a vote in Montana's vote is worth more than a vote in Texas, Florida, etc. due to population. Why should someone's vote cause their state, or yeah, why should I think they meant to say, why should someone's vote be worth more because their state has less people?
I'm glad
really,
he mentioned Montana because at least now we're at least keeping the hypothetical confined to a state that I know for sure exists out there. Now, yeah, Wyoming. I mean, I got doubts, but still for years. But like it doesn't. I say what it's actually doing is it's not making a vote in Montana matter more than Texas, because at the end of the day you could argue, well, they still have very different electoral college vote numbers at the end of the day. They have very different values. It's just a matter of we have a system in place that is not just a one-to-one, popular democracy vote for a particular for the presidential office. We have a system that is giving the entirety of a state a value that something that is representative of their value versus their population and everyone who lives there. Like Montana still may have only like like, let's just say it has 10. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but let's say it has 10 and Texas has 45. Does the, you can go back and forth on how that vote matters to someone a little bit, but it's at least giving the different states some representative value, but still acknowledging that, yeah, at the end of the day, those states are very different. They're still not the same.
Well, if you want to take it, like, instead of using Montana as the thing, DC, a Democrat's vote in DC counts for three and a half times the vote of a Republican in Texas.
But how many electoral votes does DC have? 3. But an individual in DC, if a Democrat votes in DC, and you're saying it's 3 times more valuable than a Republican vote, well, in the grand scheme of things, it may sound really good with the numbers, but in the grand scheme of things, that value doesn't seem very real to anyone. That 3 times value doesn't seem very real when DC is still only worth 3 votes at the end of the day.
So are you saying that because the state is small, that the candidates ignore them because of the Electoral College?
If you're running for president, exactly how do you ignore DC? Everyone in Washington DC knows who you are. You don't have to campaign outside of the Capitol building.
No, yeah, but why would you? I mean, if you're Trump, why would you campaign in DC? They voted like 90% for Biden or Harris. I can't remember the Harris. But
and it doesn't mean that this. And the thing is like this system doesn't make a lot of prescriptions to candidates. It's just basically there to be like, you ought be campaigning in every state. You ought be considerate of the needs of the voters in every part of the country. So it's like, if you have 5 states that are really close together, chances are they have a lot of similar issues. And when you campaign there, you're going to be able to just go very quickly around those states, probably build a very effective consensus that gets people on board. And suddenly, those 5 states that all have little electoral vote numbers, they group together in favor of a particular candidate. Suddenly, that block matters a lot more.
So how come Republicans don't really campaign in Vermont?
Why do they not really campaign in Vermont at all? Because on the state level, Vermont is what I believe is even more left-leaning than Massachusetts. Vermont, of every state in New England, is probably from a conservative perspective, I would say, as a lifelong New England resident, Vermont's a lost cause to the right. Like, you run the people you can, because at the end of the day, you still have a lot of people in Vermont who care about issues like gun rights because of how the state is as far as land. But again, Vermont is a very different animal from other states, even in the Northeast alone.
I'll give my answer for why they don't campaign in Vermont, because Democrats won it with about 63.8% of the vote. And it's just not worth it to shift to spend the resources.
And under an electoral system, you make calculated decisions on where you're going to essentially put the troops for an election.
Yeah.
Same as you would if there was a popular vote. That strategy would be exactly the same. It's not something that's an indictment of the Electoral College in some way.
However, under a national popular vote, a Democrat or Republican might want to go to Vermont because, hey, if they get an extra 10,000 votes in there, yeah, they're not going to flip the state to be majority Republican. But hey, 10,000 votes is 10,000 votes.
But if it was just a popular vote, why would they need to move?
Well, because that's where the votes are.
But you can vote anywhere, and there wouldn't be an.
No, I'm saying the candidates.
If there wasn't an electoral system, then who cares where someone votes?
Currently, a Republican isn't going to go to Vermont to try to win an extra 10,000 votes because it's not going to flip the state. So they don't care. They just ignore it. But with a national popular vote, you could go to Vermont and say, hey, I want to get an extra 10,000 votes because, hey, 10,000 votes is 10,000 votes. Under the Electoral College, those extra 10,000 votes for a Republican are lost. It's wasted time, wasted money. But in the national
well, again,
popular vote,
you also showed that we can't prove it would lead to a higher participation, and that people who currently vote Republican in Vermont would not, or would vote more or less than they do currently. So it's like, if you're looking at, if I'm a Republican running for president, looking at Vermont, if there was a popular vote, I would probably say, you know what, we'll send the campaign people out, but that state, like that we probably have at least the regular Republican voters are at least locked in. Like, we're not going to gain. There probably aren't huge gains to make in a state represented in the Senate by Bernie Sanders.
well, I think I think
We probably have to focus on
necessarily...
state elections and getting a lot of the far left people out of Vermont and change the political culture in the state before that would actually be an effective, before like a popular vote in there it would matter.
I think if a Republican candidate went to Vermont and spent time and resources in Vermont, I think they would get more votes than they would otherwise. I think that's pretty...
And under a popular vote, that would be time just better spent in higher populated areas.
All right, let's do this next one we got here from Prince of Dogs. Kind of touched on it, but should there be requirements or limitations to who can vote and why?
Yeah, I said like I said, I don't think it's as big of a concern, because I think the people who are like uneducated on it and just like, I don't think they're interested in politics, which is unfortunately a lot of the country. I think they just self-sort out, so they don't do that. But I wouldn't be opposed to something like being able to pass the national civics test. I mean, the test is available online. Anybody can like look at it. It's not like meant to trick you. I don't think it should be like, with your citizenship test. I don't know if you fail that. I don't know if you can like retake it, or if you can, how many times you can. But like, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to like, oh, if you take it once and you fail it, you can just take it again every year or whatever until you pass it. I don't think that's super restrictive. Maybe make them retake it like every 10 years or something, 20 years, something like that. I don't know. I don't know how you would implement that, but I wouldn't be opposed to something like that.
Yeah, there should be requirements. I've always agreed with that. Regardless of the political system, I don't think you can just have one person, one vote. It would not work, especially with the size of the country that we have. It would never work. Like, if you have a country the size of Switzerland, then yeah, I'm willing to hear someone out. That one person, one vote can work in a small area. But especially here, no. I think not only should you have to pass some kind of test, but then you can get further into, should someone be a net gain for society to vote? Should they have to put more in than they take from the system? That's another way you can reduce vote. You can shrink the electorate. I think you ultimately just want more informed and more intelligent voters who understand how the system works and how policies work before they actually cast a ballot.
So talking about like repealing the 19th Amendment, right? Here's a question that I've always wondered. Would you rather take away the right for women to vote? Like, okay, you have two people. You have one person who thinks that foreign countries pay tariffs, and you have a woman who knows that the importer pays the tariff. Who should be voting in that situation? The man who doesn't know who pays a tariff, or the woman who does?
Well, what you're talking about, you're giving me an outlier of a situation anyway, because we've got one woman who understands how paying tariffs works. Well, that's not going to be the majority of women voters. The majority of women voters
apparently that's not the majority of voters.
And it would still be better that for the love of God, she not vote. Collectively, with all women, it would still be better that she not vote.
So you would rather have 100 men who don't know how tariffs work.
Well, you're giving me the choice between an informed outlier and an ignorant voter. So right there, it's a it's a poor choice to have to make.
It's to get
when overwhelmingly, if you get out of the outlier, it would be overwhelmingly better if more women did not vote,
even if they were more informed.
Again, that's an outlier. Most women will not be more informed than men politically.
I don't know about that.
I mean, they could be informed about some bullshit, but it doesn't mean they're informed.
All right. Next question we got here from Tomahawk says, can either one of you name a dictatorship that came to power in a nation with an electoral college?
As far as I'm aware, I think we're the only nation that has an electoral college or something like that.
And I'll go.
I don't know.
Actually,
I don't know of any
the
other.
answer is no, because every country where you see a military take over, it's overwhelming. These are parliamentary governments, and the very important difference between us and them has nothing to do with the Electoral College. It has more to do with the fact that we make the commander-in-chief of the military a civilian, whereas in a lot of parliamentary countries, especially you look in Africa and Asia where these coups take place, it's the commander-in-chief of the military is a military official, and when they don't like the results of an election, they step in and say you're fired. It just happened once. It just happened last week in Guinea-Bissau, and it almost happened on Monday in Benin. It's happened in about 8 West African countries, 10 African countries in total in the past 5 to 10 years. When you let the military run itself, they will become political whenever they want, when it's convenient, without the people say so, and they don't give a fuck how people vote.
All right. Next question we have here is, let me see, from Vigilante TV says, Wally, if in 2024 Trump won the popular vote but lost the Electoral College, would you not be saying the election was rigged?
I never said the election was rigged when Obama won twice. I understand how the Electoral College system works. I've ultimately, when it comes down to that, it's like, yeah, was I happy when Obama won? No. Did I respect the results? Yeah. Ultimately, yeah, was I pissed about 2020 is probably what he's trying to get at. Yeah, I was, but ultimately life goes on and you keep fighting.
All right. All right. And then you didn't have anything for that base? Did you want to say anything?
I will say that a lot of people think that that the idea of like getting rid of the Electoral College was just because of like 2000 and 2016. The thing is like that's kind of when I went through and I looked at the historical times. Like I said, there's been 700 times that people have tried to change or get rid of the Electoral College. Like in 1970, they were like it was like maybe like 10 votes shy of the Senate.
I don't disqualify that those. I don't doubt that, but my point in the closing statement was, as far as a loud public narrative, for most people, I think for most people who follow politics and follow the news, that public narrative began getting loud in 2000.
Yeah, but like I said, I mean that's just like the noise, I guess. I don't know how else to say it, but like it's not.
But
new.
the context of when those kinds of public discourse happen absolutely matters, because then you can frame it. Because then it really, as you stretch it out over time, and that narrative keeps coming out publicly, you start to see a pattern of behavior forming where where the majority is people of one side of the political spectrum who seem to only think the system is busted and needs to go sometimes, and the sometimes is always when they lose.
Yeah, but I mean, like I said, I mean, there was an effort in the 1970 which got really close. There was that it passed the House. It was filibustered in the Senate. There was another one in 1950 that passed the Senate, and then the House never took it up. And there's times in like going back to the 1820s, like I said, it's the whole idea that like this is just because, you know, Dems mad, like that's historically not true.
Well, I mean, that another part of that though is like, yeah, they try to change the system. Politicians submit legislation all the time. That never means that it succeeds. And certainly in the case of something like an electoral college, like, yeah, we're not meant with the way our system works to be able to just chuck some grenades in the room, blow it up, and then build a whole brand new luxury apartment out of the space in 5 seconds. It's not like any change we make to the structure of our system was formed in a way that changing it was not meant to be done lightly. And it's something that if we took that seriously more broadly as an American society, we would actually still be having constitutional conventions as we were intended to have, and not relying on judicial fiat to change the Constitution.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I think too many people, I would agree on that I think too many people these days view the Constitution as kind of like a set document, and it was never intended to be that way. It was always...
Yeah, the living document is out the window. It's basically what the Constitution, I would even argue right now, is a corpse that the Supreme Court gets to dissect.
Yeah, it's all original until you need to come up with like buckets of official and unofficial activities. But there's like one of the issues with the Articles of Confederation was that it was like extremely hard to change. That was like one of the issues with it. When, you know, so as difficult as it is to change the Constitution, they made it substantially easier to change the Constitution than to change the Articles of Confederation.
Yeah, and when you look at the process, as I was saying, doing that takes a lot of time, and maybe the more we have modernized technology, I think the more people have lost patience for that. They don't want to have a long political process where you have actual constructive debate and dialogue on changing the Constitution. The Supreme Court can do it in a jump cut from one scene to the next. So, of course, some people will be like, hey, this is really good as long as the Supreme Court makes rulings that I like.
All right. Well, we got one more question here. So this one's also from Vigilante TV. It says, Base, should we abolish the Senate?
So that's an interesting thing. I used to be a really, really big fan of the Senate until I recently reread, well, a few years ago, I reread the Federalist Papers. And I believe it's Federalist 72 or 62. Whatever the Federalist paper where I think it's Hamilton is talking about the Senate. And he says something where he's talking about why the Senate should have equal representation. And it goes back to what I was talking about, the idea that the United States didn't consider themselves one nation at the founding. And that's what he points out is that he says, like, look, if everybody in the United States of America considered themselves to be one nation, the Senate would actually be unjust. He says it would be the moral way to do it would be to have proportional representation among the nations of the people. He says, but we don't have that. We have people who are New Yorkers and Virginians and Massachusettsans. I don't know how to say but we used to call our, you either use the term Bay Stater or you use the acceptable term masshole. Yeah. And so the idea is that they didn't consider themselves one nation, and so that's why something like the Senate is okay and why it works. I don't think that applies today. I think we do consider ourselves one nation, and so because of that, I think we should follow Madison or Hamilton's advice. I think logistically it's more difficult because it can't be just done with a simple constitutional amendment. And another thing is I think it creates additional issues because originally when they were originally meant to represent the state legislatures, not the people of the states directly. And so now we have this issue where you have representatives and senators representing the same constituencies. Whereas I think it was good to have different constituencies kind of from the Senate and the House that kind of could conflict and create that kind of check and balance. But when you have the senators representing the same constituency as the House, it kind of defeats that check and balance that was originally built into the Constitution. I think logistically it's difficult because you can't, like I said, you can't just do it with a simple constitutional amendment. But I do think that we should get rid of it for those reasons. I would replace it. I know you, Wicked Wally, might not like this. I would take the House and make the House have 6-year terms, and then have so it basically replaces the Senate in that function, and then have the House be for 2-year terms be like a parliamentary system, where you have like if libertarians get like 10% of the vote nationally, they get 10% of the seats in the House. I think something like that I think would work better for us as a country today, and would also allow for like other third parties and break up the duopoly if you buy into that. So
I think in the middle of all of that, I'll end on my one parting comment of that of it gives us time to also thoughtfully reflect on how we are so united, more united than ever, so united in fact that we have been constantly having conversations about a national divorce for over a year.
Oh, it's been longer than that.
But more united than ever.
No, the national divorce. I mean, that's I remember hearing about that back in like early 2000s, like mid 2000s.
Getting
But
louder.
I think that's dumb because like
just like everything else, it gets louder.
But I think it's kind of dumb. Like, how do you do that? Like red states, blue states, like it just doesn't make any sense. Like, what do you do with Georgia, where like or Kentucky, where the governor's blue? Like,
I think what you have to do is you have to do what Yugoslavia did, where you try to figure it out yourself, and then eventually people come along and just drop bombs and tell you what to do. That's the last time we saw a national divorce attempted, and nobody's had the nerve to try since.
All right. So that is going to wrap up our Q&A for tonight. Again, thank you everyone in the live here for all the questions, the engagement, the support. This is seriously a big help, and what allows me to keep bringing you these debates, all the content that I'm bringing you. Thank you so much for helping me bring that, and I appreciate every single one of you for that. And of course, a huge thank you to our debaters for stepping into the arena tonight, all right, sharpening their ideas in front of all of us. All right, so before we keep going, just check real quick. Are you both planning to stay for the open panel tonight?
Yeah, sure. I just need to take like a quick
staying, I'm breaking out the tequila.
Yeah, I was going to go crack a beer, but if I just need to take a quick like 2-minute break and grab that.
I know the regular VK watchers haven't seen me touch alcohol the past 2.5 hours, and I know they all deserve better of me.
That's what's up. Well, that's perfect, because see, this is what's going to happen next. We're going to roll the debate outro song and video. It runs for about 4 minutes. It's perfect time. Go hit the washroom, grab a drink, stretch your legs, do whatever you need to do before we do the Chaos and Chill open panel. And during the outro, I'll drop the link in the chat for anyone who wants to join the panel, test your ideas, continue the conversation on tonight's topic. Anyone's welcome to hop in. Just come ready to think, question and debate. Also, reminder, if you're going to try to come to spurg, troll, bring personal drama, all that shit, you'll just get muted and then most likely booted real quick. So, while you're ahead with that idea, just quit. And before we run the outro, one last reminder. Make sure you subscribe to both debaters. Their links are in the description. And if you're enjoying these debates, hit the subscribe button on the SpeakEazy channel as well, so you don't miss any of the upcoming Swords of Reason battles every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. This is where logic meets passion.